Week 14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I'll say off the wire this week. The first receiver, Jaden Higgins of the Houston Texans. So Higgins, over the last few weeks, he's definitely been the number 2 option in the receiving room for this Houston Texan team. And he's had double-digit fantasy points the last 3 out of 4 games. Obviously, Nico Collins, the number 1 wide receiver. Dalton Schultz, he's been solid at the tight end position this season. But this Texan team obviously playing great football, and Higgins has been a big part of it over the last 6 weeks of the season. Week 10 versus Jaguars, 5 catches, 42 yards, a touchdown. Week 11 in Tennessee, 4 catches, 55 yards. Week 12 versus Buffalo, 4 catches, 38 yards, a touchdown. And Week 13 at the Colts, 5 catches, 65 yards. So Higgins, he was a high draft pick this season in the NFL draft for this Houston Texan team, and he's a big target, obviously. 6'4", 6'5", could run routes, could go up there, get the jump ball, and he's been a big part of this Texan team. So this week, definitely a tough matchup coming up at the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the better defenses in the league. But Higgins, week after week's going out there, and he's being productive, and definitely a wide receiver to add this week, and he's available in 65% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. Reed, he's been out a majority of the season with the foot injury, still out there in 62% of fantasy leagues, and we haven't seen him back yet. Obviously, is Jayden Reed, where his practice window did open, but we'll see when he's totally back into the lineup for this Green Bay Packer team. So Reed, last season, I thought it was a productive year for the most part. 55 catches, 857 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns in a fumble loss. So this Packer team, all season long, they've been inconsistent in the receiving room. And obviously, ever since Tucker Kraft went down with injury, it's been tough as well for this Packer team to get consistency out of the receiving room, and not even at the tight end position, obviously, where Luke Musgrave hasn't done much. So like I said, consistency's been a problem in the passing game for this Packer team. And Jayden Reed, I know he's not really a true number 1, but at least he's a wide receiver that's gone out there over the last couple seasons and produced. So definitely a wide receiver that could be back sooner than later for this Packer team. And then on the wire this week, next receiver, Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. So off the field, late to meetings and all that stuff, Keon Coleman, he was a healthy scratch and inactive over the last few weeks, but now he was returned to the lineup week 13 in Pittsburgh. I know he's only 2 catches, 9 yards, and a touchdown, but they still have a problem in the receiving room as this Buffalo Bill team. I know they signed the veteran, obviously, Brandon Cooks to a contract as well, but they don't have consistent pass catchers besides Khalil Shakir and Dalton Cade. He's been out a while, obviously, with his injury as well. So right now, Keon Coleman, I know it was only 2 catches. He did find the end zone. And like I said, there's no one in this Buffalo offense really stepping up and making big plays. With Coleman back in the lineup and finding the end zone last week's ball at the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe they could get him going once again and get him focused back. So Keon Coleman, like I said, I know he didn't do much in the game, but someone to mention on the waiver wire out there in 65% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers. I know this Panther team, they're going on bye this week is Carolina. Jalen Coker finally had a big game for Carolina in the upset victory versus the Los Angeles Rams. And actually, 2 out of 3 games, he's had double-digit fantasy point games as Coker. Week 11 at Atlanta, 4 catches, 52 yards, and 2-point conversion. Week 12 at the 9, 3 catches, 32 yards. And Week 13 versus the Rams, the breakout game, 4 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. So Coker missed the first 7 weeks of the season. And from weeks 8 to 10, he didn't do much. But the last couple weeks, he's getting more comfortable in this offense for this Carolina Panther team is Jalen Coker. He's a big target and a guy they liked a lot going back to last season in his rookie year. But now finally healthy and making plays. He's definitely a wide receiver to keep an eye on. And he's out there in tons of leagues in 96%. But like I said, he is going on by it. But then week 15, a good matchup at New Orleans. Next wide receiver, Dontayvion Wicks of the Green Bay Packers. Dontayvion Wicks, every once in a while, he'll go out there, have a big game for this Packer team. I'm not saying he's going to be a consistent wide receiver, but him and Jordan Love have a decent rapport. And the last couple weeks here for Wicks, he's getting more part of this offense. Obviously, Matthew Golden, he's been out of the lineup. But the thing is, Jayden Reed, who I mentioned earlier in the video, he might return to the lineup sooner than later. So week 11 at the Giants to catch 9 yards. Week 12 versus Minnesota, 2 catches, 32 yards. And week 13, the breakout game at the Lions, 6 catches, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So obviously, like I said, he's been inconsistent throughout his career. He's more of a 3 or 4 receiver at best for this Green Bay Packer team. But anytime a guy goes out there has a big game, over 90 yards, and finds the end zone twice. I'm going to mention him on the waiver wire list, and he's out there in 99% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver, Adonai Mitchell of the New York Jets. Adonai Mitchell, he was in the Source Garden deal with the Indianapolis Colts, a former first-round pick of the Indianapolis Colts. And Adonai Mitchell, the last couple weeks, his targets are going up, and he had a breakout game in Week 13 in the victory versus the Atlanta Falcons. The first 3 games with the Jets, Week 11 in New England, a catch, 10 yards. Week 12 at Baltimore, 2 catches, 42 yards. He dropped a couple passes in that one. In Week 13, a big breakout game versus the Falcons, 8 catches, 102 yards, and a touchdown, 12 targets. In Week 14, a decent matchup versus the Miami Dolphins. Their defense isn't really that good. And this Jet team with Garrett Wilson not in the lineup, it's down to the 2 young wide receivers who they traded for at the deadline, Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie. So Mitchell, after a big game, getting peppered targets, he's out there in 99% of fantasy leagues, and definitely a good ad for fantasy owners this week. The next receiver, Devon Vele of the New Orleans Saints. Vele last season, he had a couple decent ball games, big targeted wide receiver with the Denver Broncos, and in the offseason they got him was the same team, and obviously they cut loose Brandon Cooks and traded away Rashid Shaheed. So Vele jumping up the depth chart over the last few weeks. Week 10 at Carolina, catch 15 yards. Week 12 versus Atlanta, 3 catches, 37 yards, 7 targets. And Week 13, a big ball game at the Dolphins, 8 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. So like I said, he's the number 2 option in the receiving room now. Behind Chris Olave is Devon Vele. Big targets, 6'6", 6'7". And Week 14, a good matchup here at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a defense that's had trouble all season long with wide receivers, giving up the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So Vele, like I said, he's a big target. It's New Orleans Saints team. They're going to be trailing just about all these games this season. And Tyler Shough, he's had some confidence in Vele over the last few weeks. So definitely a receiver to add this week. Out there, 99% of fantasy leagues. And the final receiver, Isaac Tesla of the Detroit Lions. Tesla found the end zone in last week's ball game for this Detroit Lion team. And now Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know it's a low ankle sprain, and he's going to try to give it a go this Thursday night versus the Dallas Cowboys. A big game for both teams on Thursday Night Football. But Tesla, we've seen some crazy catches from him early in the season. And in Week 13, once Amon-Ra went down, 2 catches, 35 yards, and a touchdown. I have a lot of catches this season as Tesla. Only 6 catches, 100 yards, but 3 of them are touchdowns. And like I said, if St. Brown doesn't give it a go, he'll step in as the number 2 wide receiver, and him and Jared Goff have a decent amount of rapport. Like I said, you don't see the field much is Tesla, but 3 touchdowns and 6 catches, so someone to keep an eye on. And he's out there in 99% of fantasy leagues. That's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.